Welcome to the Second Renaissance podcast, where we decode the rebirth of human creativity in a technology-driven world. I'm Sorman-Nilsson, global futurist, author, and the co-creator of the Adobe CQ, the IQ test for your creative leadership, and your host for the Second Renaissance. Nichol Bradford, great to have you on the Second Renaissance. Thanks for dialing in. You're in a hotel somewhere in the world.
Yes, I live in San Francisco, but I took an excursion to Palm Springs just to get someplace else. I've been sheltered in place in the same place since last March, and I just needed a change of scenery.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, I feel like we've all been, stuck in a Dostoevsky novel or something like this in the last, 12 months or so. I'm curious. I mean, you've had a huge impact through your work at Singularity University. I know you founded an organization called Willow, and that you're a lecturer at Stanford University. You're doing some really impactful work at the CIS. Can you just give us a little bit of your sort of, academic and business background, the family tree in a sense, and let us know why you're kind of like this eminent force to be addressing a very important topic today, which is of course transformative technologies and the Transformative Technologies Lab that you have founded.
Yeah, great. So, I think I want to start sort of where I'm at now, because everything, it's one of those things. It's like when you look back on life, it looks like a straight line, even though, it when it's lived forward, it doesn't necessarily feel like that. But the threads of what I do today has actually always been present in my life, even since I was a little girl watching Star Trek in Houston, Texas. It all gets connected. So what I do today for the listeners out there is that I believe, and it's my mission, to catalyze the health, happiness, and fullest potential of every human. And to do that, I have co-founded a global organization of builders. And those builders include entrepreneurs, investors, and innovators. These are all the people who are sort of driven to create a new era, this second renaissance. And when I saw, the opportunity to be on this show, I thought, Anders and I are going to really get along. And so, what the premise is that we can take technology and we can actually use it for the inner landscape. And that if you think about Maslow's hierarchy and you think about the bottom two rows, that has been the traditional use of technology: safety, security, food, shelter, etc. But all of the layers above it are about the human condition, human creativity, human possibility, human belonging, human connection. And so what our thesis is that technology for this inner landscape goes across three verticals. The first is mental and emotional well-being. The second is social and emotional wellness. And the third is human purpose and performance. And within those verticals, I look for founders and researchers who have research that can be delivered through technology. For mental and emotional well-being, I'm interested in stress, anxiety, garden variety depression, happiness, and sleep. For social and emotional wellness, I'm interested in self-awareness, emotional self-regulation, and all of the human interaction skills. And of that, I actually include, for example, trust. I think trust is a skill, the giving and the receiving of it. We don't really teach it that way, but anything that can be learned can be skilled. And if it can be skilled, there's a role for technology in it. And that's really tied to the future of work. And we could talk more about that too. And then the third category is human purpose and performance. And this is enhancing our emotions, enhancing our cognitive abilities, as well as identifying purpose and meaning. Because all of these things, whether it's purpose and meaning, whether it's connection with self and others, or whether it's the ability to manage stress, they're all the same thing. And so what makes us really unique, and what makes my thesis very unique, is that I believe that this is all a spectrum of mind. It is all a spectrum of the inner landscape, and that there's a role for technology in that in order to make it scalable, accessible, and affordable. And the challenge with the word scalable is that it's been dirtied by tech a little bit, because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of humanity that's not in it. So now I use the word, pollinating. It's like a dandelion. Um, a single dandelion can have 15,000 seeds in its lifetime. And so it still gets everywhere, but it's, every seed is a self-contained possibility. And so, that's really what this is about. I came to it from video games. I had been working in China, overseeing World of Warcraft China, which at that time, and I was doing operations, I was leading operations. At that time, World of Warcraft China was the largest branch of one of the largest video games in the entire world. And I did that. And then in between two assignments, I went on a meditation retreat, and I had really what can only be called an awakening. I had a intensely, extraordinary experience where when I finished the retreat, I felt deeply, deeply connected, not only to myself, but to all of life, every other human. And I wanted people to experience that. I'd been in video games for 14 years, and I got into video games because I believe that video games were the next evolution in human storytelling. I think one of the, the biggest things that's coming is, what is the nature of the digital worlds that will overlap ours? Will they be predatory, or will they be platforms? And how will we move in between them? And, let's definitely talk about augmentation and the nature of it later. And then before that, I was in, business school, and, all my life I have been a creative. I, wrote a novel that, the outline of it when I was in college was basically about 9 Black women who start a multinational technology company whose revenues or profits are dedicated to the, liberation of women and girls, mental liberation, how you think, who you are, for women and girls around the world. And then, really, when I really look back, I remember being a kid watching Star Trek. And I grew up in Texas in the 80s, and at that time, like, race was more of an issue even than it, than people might imagine it was now. And so I used to watch this show and what really sort of like captivated me about it is, one, people's lives were so much better. And two, humanity, for the most part, had decided that they were on the same team. And that just really, spoke to me. And so, lived forward, it's like, what is the connection that leads one to the next? Look backward, it's really all about human flourishing. It's all about connection to self and others. And, the last thing I'll say is, I think that the work is among, I'll just say among, the most important work of this time, because that is, our inner landscape is the place that we haven't made, available for all, the kinds of tools that allow human beings to be healthy, happy, and fulfill their potential in a major way. And I do believe also that this is the critical time, because I think that there are 2 roads. One looks like Starfleet, and the other looks like Hunger Games, and that is not written yet. And so, there's still, I mean, I think the Starfleet options have gone, or probabilities have gone up a bit. You know, in the last several months, I think that's gone up. And I think COVID is really making people examine what's important. But that future is not written yet. And it's really going to take all of us working together to bring that future to bear.
So I'm curious. I mean, and fascinating, life story, and certainly some of the threads there, which we'll go and pluck out in a moment. I guess in the present moment, despite the fact that people have recognized and identified that technology really has become in many ways our lifeline for human connectivity and telehealth, and the deployment of AI with regards to vaccine developments, etc. That people do have this sort of love-hate relationship, this fear-based relationship with technology, which in many ways is sort of this, it's a neutral tool and it can be used for good or for ill. From your perspective, given the Transformative Technologies Lab, I'm assuming that you're sort of biased one way, but tell me a little bit about the sort of potentiality. You talk about the importance of, I guess, mapping and maybe even hacking or scaling or pollinating the inner landscape. How can technology do that?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I'll give you a couple of very specific examples. So I'll give you a couple of specific examples, and then I'm actually going to start off with, a definition of technology, because I think that will help. And often when people are thinking about tech, they're thinking, as an issue, they're thinking actually about a very specific type of tech, but they don't say that. They say tech in general. And yeah, that's how I'll do it. So the definition of technology for me is that what takes what is scarce and makes it abundant. And so, and there's a period of time, like you and I both have glasses on, like 3,000 years ago.
It's like the original wearable technology.
Yeah, 3,000 years ago, pure magic. Like maybe stonable, pure magic. Your cars, vaccines, microwaves, like we're surrounded by technology. What most people actually really mean when they're talking about the perils of technology is they are talking about attention economy social networks. It's a very
social dilemma style of worries.
Yeah, attention economy social networks is really what they're talking about. That's 99.9% of what they are talking about. And so, I really encourage people when they say, the perils of tech, they should be specific and say attention economy social networks, because if we don't name it and we don't define it, then we can't do anything about it, because people don't know what they're sort of like solving for. It's sort of like I have a lot of friends who work in climate, and there is a helplessness that people get when you just say climate, overall. And so it's really helpful for people when you talk about, when you're mobilizing people to talk about very specific things that, they can orient on the thing that they're the most passionate about, whether it's water or carbon removal or a bunch of other things. And so if we want to do something about this technology, if we want it to actually really serve us and we want to solve for the problems that have happened, then we need to be specific when we're talking about it. And it's attention economy social networks is the bulk of the issue. And so, so within that, I am not interested in any of that type of technology. I am interested in community and I am interested in social bonds, but there's lots of other ways to do that as opposed to the attention economy. Where you and the technology are not on the same side. It's designed to take your attention and you are the product. And so there's lots of other ways to do that. Some really specific examples. One of my absolute favorite examples is a company called, or a product called Moxie. And Moxie is a social emotional learning robot. And a lot of times people are like, why do we need a robot to learn about emotions? Well, in the US, 90% of K through 12 teachers want emotional modules. And this is really, it's like, relating to your feelings and a bunch of other things like that. And the reality is, like, when you think about how we teach people how to feel, how to be, how to become, how to deal with their own stress and anxiety, how to negotiate, how to handle conflict, because when people are out here peopling, there's conflicts, and that doesn't mean it's a war, but it's like, I want pepperoni pizza and you want vegan. Like, how do you negotiate that? It's like, we're not actually taught this. What we are taught in school is we're taught, we have an industrialized school system. And so we're taught things that are basically, units of production. And, we aren't really taught how to human. And the reason I'm going to give you this example that's going to make you go, okay, that's kind of crazy.
I love that. I was going to say, I love that you're using human as a verb, by the way. So
my other favorite one is like peopling. People be peopling all over the place.
yeah.
They're just peopling. And so, it's like kids are born with vocal cords, but we don't expect them to be born speaking, Swedish. Like, we don't expect it at all. We fully expect that even though you're born with vocal cords that are developed, you're going to have to learn the language. But we actually believe that people being born with emotions equates to emotional fluency. We don't teach it anywhere in our society with the exception of Montessori schools and Finland.
Well, I was going to say that because my son Lucian, who's 3.5, he goes to Montessori, and yesterday we had a parent and teacher morning where, in fact, one of the liaisons is now bringing in mindfulness training for the kids at this very young, tender age, which I think is a beautiful thing. I just wish I could have been trained earlier. I'm having to retrofit some of these skills later on in life.
Well, one of the other things that will happen in your in your son's education is that they're also going to teach him emotional fluency. They're going to teach him how to describe what he's feeling, to know it, to even know how he's feeling. Because it's like, I can't get you to attend to my needs if I can't even imagine what they are and describe them to you. And so, when you talk to most people about, so if you say, okay, all the kids need Montessori education, and then it's like, how many children are there in the entire world? The first thing people are going to talk about is resources and cost. And that is a really great example of something where, technology can support more children having access to that type of education. It's not to replace parents. It's not, it's not to replace teachers. It's just to complement. And so this particular product I want to tell you about, it's a robot, and that's just Gen 1. It's $1,600. That's expensive, all of that. But they've gotten a couple of things done really well. First of all, so what happens is that, I think the first thing is that technology is not, the mediator of experience in totality. And what I mean by that is that, so the child gets the robot, and the robot sends the children on missions with other humans. So, it might ask you, if I'm the robot, I might say, Anders, who is your best friend? And who would you say?
Wow. Who is my best friend? That's a really good question. I'm going to say Ben, who is currently living in Vanuatu.
Okay, so then the robot would ask you about how Ben feels. And then would say, well, go ask Ben and then come back and tell me. And so the goal is, like, it's not that I'm learning emotions from a robot. It's that the robot is the chapter headings, and people are the chapters. And it sends people out. It sends kids out. And the other thing they've done is it can only be active for 1 hour a day. So children must learn how to wait. And so you hear all of these studies about how, impulse control is an indicator of a childhood indicator of later success. But if you think about it and you're a parent, it's like, no one's ever told you how to teach impulse control, there's not like it's like, okay, here's how and you might get it in a book or two.
I'm getting like flashbacks to to school drop-offs this morning. Yeah,
absolutely. And so what happens with this is that the kids have to wait. They have to wait 24 hours. Nothing can be done about it. They can't complain. They can't make it happen. So in an on-demand world, they have to wait. It also keeps them from binging, which is wonderful. The third part is they use homomorphic security. And so all the child's data, like its voice files back and forth with the robot, any images of the child's face, it's all stored locally. And the company doesn't pull it up. The only thing that goes up is the math. It's kind of like, bug reports. So the only thing that goes up is the math. And if parents lose their password, then the robot gets wiped. And they sort of like have to explain to their kid why the robot doesn't remember them. So they've gotten these really big things right. And their goal is not to have, robots in every home. It's just the very beginning of like, how do you really develop, a foundation training system, that allows, children to develop emotional fluency, supported by their parents. And so when the person who set out to do it, Paolo, he said, I want to build something that can be a best friend for children, not their only friend, but a best friend, and an ally for parents. And so it does other things like the way children speak can show if there's any developmental issues, even before often parents can tell. And so it's like, giving the parents a lot of information and supporting them, in their busy lives. It's not a replacement. An hour a day is not a replacement parent, but it's a tool. And so that is, there aren't many in the social emotional area, but that's I think it's a perfect example of what's possible.
Well, and what comes to mind here, I'm sort of getting goosebumps when I'm listening to you, but it's like the augmentation. And I guess, it's a technological extension of maybe what is our limited awareness, right? And that, if you have like a little alarm bell, going off that, you're hearing, say, for lack of a better example, a lisp, because it's how XYZ always speaks. You might sort of nip something like that in the bud earlier on, through some smaller future signals, right, before they potentially become a bigger issue later down the track. So I think of that as sort of as augmentation, and what wonderful example. I think you're right in saying that people, criticize technology largely because of, movies like The Social Dilemma and what you've previously described. But there's also this sort of fear that, tech will not just augment humans, but, there's also this fear of technological unemployment. And I guess my next question is sort of two-pronged. One, do you see that, whole scale will lose certain jobs, or is it more tasks in our everyday life? And then secondly, as technology, gets more sophisticated, like in the robot and other AIs that I'm sure you'll describe today, as it gets more sophisticated, what sort of fundamental human skills are the ones that we should be really, nourishing in ourselves and the next few generations?
Yeah, I mean, that's wonderful. It's out of all of those job loss numbers, there certainly are going to be jobs that are lost. But the most important one is actually the task shift. And so basically anything that's rote, anything that is a repetitive task can be done by software. And so what you're really seeing, like if you were to look at your phone, if you were to take your phone, I don't know what happened. You dropped for a second. If you were to take your phone and look at every app on your phone, and then just say all the phones in the world disappeared. Like there's been, the number of jobs that you're only just your phone by itself has already taken with software, right? So software takes what's rote. But what's left are the things that we don't train people how to do, which is to be truly deeply human. And because what's left are humans creating together and solving problems together and leading together and having intuitive leaps together. Like that is what's left. And so that is why that future of work and social emotional learning is so important, because, like Google did this thing called Project Aristotle when they were looking at, the most innovative teams. And the most innovative teams, they set out and they thought that it was going to be teams that were led by the most brilliant engineers, because it's such an engineering oriented company. And that was not the case. It was certainly the people were brilliant, but it was the people who had the most measurable innovations and delivered the most ROI to the company were the people who had the ability to create psychological safety. And people often, when they hear that, they think that it means a rubber room or it's nice. It's like some of the nicest places you and I have been are some of the most toxic places. It's not about nice. It's about, is it okay to take a risk? Can I think with you and that be okay? Can I be wrong with you? And so that is like that is really what does it. And so, the reason why examples like Moxie are so important, and why it's an issue that there are so few, is because for the curve on as the tasks shift to software and the speed to which we need to jump onto humans creating together, solving problems together. And by the way, humans solving problems together is also known as a company. It's also known as a community. It's also known as a family. It's also known as a country. It's like our potential is so much more even than we've even imagined. And that's where all the new jobs will be. It'll be in those new entities, and it'll be in people creating things that we haven't even imagined. And so we have to get to that point.
You mentioned World of Warcraft a little bit earlier on, and your role in ops in China. I'm curious, what role does games? We've touched upon Montessori, but what about the digital world, or analog monopoly, whatever it happens to be? What role does games play to help humans, amplify our own skills or tweak them?
Okay, let me start with my definition of a game. A game is narrative, exploration, play, and community.
So say that again.
Really
so narrative, exploration,
play, and community.
Play and community. Yeah.
And so, when you see animals, play games together, it's like when we were kids and we were playing tag, tag in 2021 is just tag, tag in, 2000, BC, is avoid the predators, right? So it's like games are, really engaging ways of understanding and experiencing the world and connecting with one another and building bonds. That's really what it is. And so whether it's analog or whether it's digital, what's interesting about the digital games is that, the digital games and the digital worlds allow us to experience things we couldn't otherwise experience. So, one of the examples would be, in a lot of the early VR, there was some studies where there were studies based on bias, where people would walk through an experience in as either a gender or a race that they were not naturally. And they're sort of like, when they're sort of like measured for bias before and after, bias decreases, after you spend a short period of time in an avatar that is not your gender, not your race. Now they had to do things like you have to show the arms like this, so someone sees their arms as themselves. Like there's things that you have to do for that to happen, and it's not always a permanent decrease, but for like right afterwards there's a decrease. And so the ability for games to allow you to walk in someone else's shoes, to experience someone else's life, because and often when people talk about games, it's sort of like they sort of say that as a negative. But in the world that we have today, experimentation is expensive. It can be very costly to to try on something else. And since one of the processes of becoming an adult is to try things you don't like and to discover that, I think there's a lot of great use for it.
And how is, game design and what the likes of, Jane McGonigal, et cetera, are doing, how is that, can we apply that sort of game-based thinking to some of the big issues with the human condition, or some of the big, societal or global challenges we're currently seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, I absolutely, games are outstanding for learning, like they're really outstanding for learning. I was talking to an investor the other day who invested in ed tech, and so much of the ed tech for a very long time was about, how to deliver, this module. And there's like, he had found someone who instead their focus is on joy. So think about all the ed tech have you ever seen. It's really about like, you know, uh, you know, power filling, almost like, fragua, like power filling concepts in the most efficient, effective, remembering way possible.
Yeah. Educational gavage. Yeah.
Joy. It's not about the joy of learning, the curiosity of exploring. It's not about that, but it should be. And the other day I was talking to one of my favorite fields is this. There's this incredible field called Neuro Aesthetics, and basically they are, using brain imaging and other things to, really I try to identify the impact of the arts on the brain. And so there are things like, seeing the impact of dancing on the brain, and other things. And so, we were talking about there's probably a world, and this requires a breakthrough in imaging, which, by the way, is on its way, like an absolute breakthrough in imaging. We're not there yet. Right now, it's like brain imaging is very expensive. It's very hard to get done. Medical uses are first. Psychology uses and other things are second at universities, blah, 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 blah. But, just like anything, it's like cell phones used to be $15,000. Genomes used to be $100,000. Now genomes are less than 1,000. And cell phones are a couple of $100. And so, or they can be. And so the same thing will happen with, body imaging and brain imaging. And so she was saying that, and this was so mind blowing. She was like, there'll be a time where our definition of knowledge, it's not going to be about how many facts because the full scope of human knowledge is on the internet. There isn't anything that humanity knows that you cannot Google to, at this point. And so it's not about whether or not the facts are there and how much you know them. It's going to be about, neural density, and the like the density of your neurons, so you can have those leaps of insight that show you that this is connected to that. And so she was imagining, this is Susan Magsman at Johns Hopkins University. She was imagining a time sometime in the future where, your teacher, or your guide looks at your brain map and says, Anders, you've got to start dancing. Like this area is like this is not, you don't have enough this and this. Like you get, like you must dance for the next 3 months. Roomba, tango, waltz, and that's your assignment. Like that's what it should be, or that's what I believe it will be eventually.
So, I mean, this sort of touches on, the concepts of, wearable and even, implantable technology. And we've talked about the original, wearable technology already, but which is, of course, our spectacles. But, whenever we do research or we get asked to put in, trend reports or white papers on emerging technologies, one of our clients has asked us about, what are the biggest, wellness and health trends. A little bit of a fusion of words there. There can be a lot of, this sort of focus on like, okay, keto was trending in 2018, 2019, and then it's intermittent fasting, and it's pescatarian or veganism, and the sustainable diet, and these are no doubt very sort of generic pieces of advice. Obviously, with transformative technologies, we get this sort of we start getting a bit of a hyper personalization. Even in that space, though, we see technologies like Aura or 23andMe and different technologies that kind of do sort of like one or a few things. Do you see that? Like, is it the Apple smartwatch or another technology that can kind of give us one source of the truth that we can build different APIs into, or whatever it happens to be, to sort of to get the recommendation that Anders, you'll get XYZ, middle-aged disease unless I start dancing Roomba.
Well, the unified dashboards are not really there yet, like the truly unified dashboards that have everything, because it's like there's there's the signal, which could be your heart rate variability, your EEG, your GSR, your ECG. Like there's lots of signals, but what is the context around them? And then even if you have signal plus context, what is the correct intervention? And when you have signal plus context plus intervention, what is the right integration? That actually is, because we're holistic. We're not just, it's like the I don't know if you ever saw Schoolhouse Rock in the US, but there used to be this one song that I remember from being a kid, where they said like that, the leg bone's connected to the ham bone. It's like it actually is all connected. And so right now, where we're at in terms of technology is we're past the single signals. 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot of product out there that was just a single signal. Most of the successful products now are multi-signal. They're pulling signal from a couple of different places. The thing that we're moving out of is measuring and tracking into interventions. So when I advise founders, I'm like, if you don't have an intervention, like if you're not doing something to change things, you are like you're in yesterday. And then now I'm starting to tell founders, yes, solve your problem, because starting a company is like, it's like when the turtles get out of the nest and that race to the ocean. Like a founder has to have like sort of like an absolute focus on the problem she or he is solving. So they have to have that. But, as soon as they get to the ocean, what I believe the reality is going to be in the next couple of years is that every product is either going to have to build out its own ecosystem, or it will have to fit into another ecosystem, so that you can have that integration, that, that either goes up into a dashboard or somehow allows the person to think about their whole life as opposed to just a silo.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, I think about this not maybe from just a, personal health perspective, but also like, an IoT perspective here, and maybe even the smart home. As late as Monday, I was up at we have a little summer house, or as we call it in Sweden, or a beach house in Australia, cabin maybe by American standards, and when we don't go there, we Airbnb it, and which has been a great way, in terms of building community, actually, making new friends and having some human connectivity during periods of lockdown, etc. as well. But it is it's an offshore property. You can only get there by boat, and it's super inconvenient to get to. It's totally worthwhile, but it does involve a ferry and then a 10-minute trek. So kind of very old school, and we harvest our own rainwater for all our hydration needs. So drinking water, and we capture that from the sky. So we're limited by the size of our roof in terms of how much water we can capture, and then of course we have storage, restrictions, etc. But it becomes this sort of wonderful ecosystem once you start monitoring. So I have like the Davy water tank sensor that connects to our main water tank and gauges the pressure of how much water is left in this water tank, and it tells me based on the usage, in aggregate, or on average amongst users, depending on if it's 2 people or if it's a family of 6 staying with us, how many days before how many days of Airbnb utilization are possible before I have to ship in water or wait for a really good rainfall. I then have my Net Atmo weather station and smart home monitoring system, which of course does all the things like measures how amazingly clean the air is in this national park, but it also tells me every day how much water we actually captured from the roof, and then based upon a couple of scientific formulas, I know, okay, well, last night we got another 500 liters, which is a couple of days of usage for a couple who are having a romantic weekend up there. Then remotely I monitor the air conditioning system or the ducted heating system, so I can turn it on and off. We're using renewable energy up there, but again, I can monitor all of that remotely in case a guest didn't turn off the aircon, so that we're not overusing power. So there's but like still there's not the one app that kind of brings it all together, but at least it brings me intelligence, and it reduces what my wife calls my water anxiety, which is on the occasions that we have very hot, dry periods in Australia, like you guys do in California as well. And then based upon that, we can stage interventions and build community. So with our neighbor, for example, her water tanks are full, which means that any overflow from hers, they're currently running out into the national park, but I can use a bit of her water in exchange for keeping her yard clean and looking after some of the maintenance of her water tanks, etc. So, it's kind of, when I think about, the Internet of Things and the smart home, we can make so many smarter decisions. And I guess this, comes down to sort of, when we flip that over into, personal health and emotional and mental well-being, would be amazing to just, as you said before, be able to read the signs, know, within a shadow of doubt, the exact emotion I'm experiencing right now, figure out how that may or may not be serving me, and that, doing some breath work with Wim Hof, or, jumping in a cold shower for 35 seconds is going to help me get out of that state. Or maybe that state is serving me really, really well. What's your sort of vision for, personalized health and well-being, and both, emotional, physical, mental well-being? Because I know this is a, passion topic of yours.
Yeah, a couple of reactions. So one, I'm deeply interested in IoT and smart homes and smart cities. as well, because, a city is certainly more than buildings, but there's a lot of buildings in a city, and so smart buildings are very interesting. And so one of the things that many people don't know is that there's a lot of interesting research on the impact of cognition, on cognition of light, sound, temperature, and air quality. And cognition is definitely something that, that we track. And so all of those things, so right now for the bulk of the smart home, you know, um, outcomes that are being measured for, the bulk of what people are doing is trying to is saving money on the energy bill. But, with a slight, with a little adaptation, you could also, I think we're going to see high performance buildings, where the buildings are engineered for different things. Like, this is the building for happiness, and this is the building for relaxation, and this is the building for performance. I think, we'll see a place where, you'll see, not, you'll see labels on buildings, because so much of the design will be frictionless. It'll be just in the building. That, I think, ethics will require that buildings be labeled. Like, you might be happier in this building.
Watch out. And enter at your own risk.
Well, you should always know, like, I really believe in labeling. The other thing is that, one of the things about this kind of technology is that, one of my design principles is really keeping in mind, we can't always measure what matters. Not everything that matters can be measured, right? And so, but, but there's a lot that can be measured. And so I'm an advocate of, like, measuring what we do, like in what we can, and using it to support all of the things I've described, but having a culture and philosophy where, as our range of measurement increases, our range of magic does too on the front end. Because there should all be there. Humans require the unknowable. We require the unknowable. We're highly motivated to discover and to explore and to be creative. So we require the unknowable. And so, what I actually think will happen is, and the culture has to be right on, has to be supportive of it, is that, right now there's a lot of people falling through the cracks. Like, a really great example that would be, very effective would be, effective matching systems for people and mental health support. Not just, is it in your zip code, but is this actually the right person for you, or better match personality, voice, some other things. Because the number of people, when you look at I don't know the numbers in Australia, but like in the US, the number of people who never go back for their second visit to the therapist, wow, because they just didn't have chemistry with that person. That doesn't even include all of the people who never actually even get to see one. But it's like, that's something that, like, if you could make that first visit be effective, then that is incredible use of it. And so
like a Tinder for psychologists and psychiatrists, etc.
Tinder is surface level. Tinder is, do I like the way that you look? And do I, actually, that one's really, do I like the way that you look?
Yeah, so deep and meaningful version of this, where, be beyond any of the optics, you get a sense of, hey, are we actually going to click? Am I actually going to go into some really dark places with this person in a constructive way?
Yes. So that's like, so I'm an advocate of, like, let's use technology on the stuff that raises the floor, and then let's have a culture of magic, where we encourage the unknowable, as an essential part, of human motivation. Then the next point is a design principle that's called better without. And so, and I got this from Vivian Ming, who's amazing, but it's this idea that when we use these tools, one of the design principles should be that they actually train us up. that we go, they train us up so that, our natural human state, becomes better without, that it's not a replacement for our own judgment. So we don't end up being, the frog in the pot, that we just get so good at managing our stress that we never actually quit that job or get that divorce. It's like, get the divorce, quit the job.
Yeah. Don't just endure. Yeah.
Or have that baby, or, ask her out, that kind of thing. It's like, so there's that part. And then the last thing is that, all of this requires, like the thing that I spend a lot of my time on, a lot of my time talking to people on, and whether it's like researchers or regulators or whatever, is on ethics and data privacy, sovereignty, and integrity. And so, because, with GDPR in Europe, it's like your email address is the least of your data. If I can send you an email, it's the least of your data. The amount of neuro and bio data that's about to come online, it's like if you have a camera on your, if you have an HD camera, which I think you do because your picture's really sharp.
It is 4K.
Yeah, it can pick up your respiration and it can pick up your heart rate through the camera. So it's like the neuro and bio data.
I'm just backing off a little bit.
It's essential that we get that right. So one of my favorite things is we had a speaker at our conference who has developed the Neurodata Bill of Rights. But I think it also applies towards biodata. And it basically says things like, you have a right to agency, meaning, and they're mostly working on neurotech, but, that the things that you use should not preempt your free will. So you have the right of agency. You have the right of freedom from algorithmic bias. Now, for the most part, when people think about algorithmic bias, they think about race and gender. They think about things like there was a big case with Monster where they weren't actually showing women CEO roles because the algorithm was based on how likely is it for a woman to have a CEO role. So they never actually came up in the searches. And if you don't know there's an opportunity, you certainly aren't going to go after it, right? So, so there's those are the types of bias. But, when you get into this type of thing, it's like, a young voice, your voice now and your voice at 15 are totally different. And your voice at 70 is going to be totally different. So, it's like age, English as the first language. Like there's so many things that are based on the actual data set, and what it's being used for. So freedom from algorithmic bias just means in general, it's like you should not lose, opportunities or be damaged in any way from, the algorithm, no matter who you are. And so I think that's wonderful. There's another one that they have that's really important, which is equal access. There's a certain point where, there will be a point in the future where, if basically everyone who wants augmentation should be able to have it. It should not be a rich person's game. It should be like everyone who wants augmentation. It should be a personal choice, like, religion or anything else. And so, for that to be a right, for equal access to neurotech, like that is, I think that's fundamental. And so they have some other great ones. And privacy, of course. It should never, your neuro and bio data should never be used against you. And then of course, sovereignty, who owns what. And I think really the solution, that I'm really looking for is someone to put forth the ability to label public, private, or for sale, because you would think very differently about your personal data. Like you can pick up, I've seen emotional state from gait detection, just like how you walk. I've seen people working on that. And so let's say you go to New York, the New York operating system has never seen you before. So therefore you're really valuable, to people who are there. And you've set, oh, this is always private, this is public, and this is for sale. Mm-hmm. And if when you go from the hotel to dinner and back again, you get home, there's a check that pays for your trip to New York. Like you'd be okay with that. You'd be like, yeah, I sold that data, I'm happy about it. But you should have that choice. And so that's like, we need these types of flexibility, these types of solutions. And I believe those are coming too. It's like the early data unions that people are starting to work on. And that actually goes all the way back to the beginning of the conversation about, why it's really important to say, attention economy, social networks, because the reality is that no one person today has any leverage against Facebook. Like every time people write that thing where they're like, I hereby say Facebook can't, it's like, oh my gosh, between, your history, your friends, and the cookie network, like they've already got you completely. And so that can, if we don't specify what we're talking about, we can get overwhelmed and not work on the solutions that we actually really need to make this technology, the transformative technology, the well-being technology, the wellness technology that I work on, accessible for all.
So I'm just curious. I mean, you had your own sort of, personal eureka moment, it sounds like, at the, meditation retreat for 10 days. You're such a, tech evangelist and a humanist in so many ways. And yet there's this sort of deep grounding of ancient wisdom and using some ancient techniques to, potentially be the best version of yourself as well. Do you want to just describe that, intervention, or however you would describe that sort of, narrative journey for yourself on that sort of Maslow's needs hierarchy elevation?
Well, I mean, for me, it's like I was in China. I was rotating to Hong Kong for another role at my company, and I had 3 weeks off. And I was collecting experiences like any sort of like type A executive might. I wanted to get PADI certified in Thailand. I wanted to go to Bhutan, and I wanted to do one of these meditation retreat things. And little did I know.
It wasn't just a bucket list thing, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had been trying to meditate, but this was a 10-day silent. It was pretty hardcore in comparison to what I had done before. And it completely changed my life. And, I had, 6 challenging days and then 3 days of, feeling completely connected to all of life. And, just the happiest, the most fearless I had ever been, because, basically what happens is it turns out that, if you quiet the mind, if you quiet the inner chatter, then you're a lot less afraid, because it's that inner voice that's telling you, not the inner guidance, but the inner critic that's telling you all the terrible things that can happen. And when that voice gets quiet, it turns out you get fearless. Because you don't have a bad roommate anymore. And I just felt so amazed and so connected. I really wanted that to be available to everyone. And because I had been in technology and I had such a positive association with it, it felt logical to me that the two would go together. Like, why would you not? How could you not? And so then I was introduced to my co-founder for the nonprofit, And, and that was 7 years ago.
Yeah. Beautiful convergence of mindfulness and technology, mindful technology, right? It's I'm curious. We're nearly into the end zone, and thank you for speaking up. We're beyond the 10-day silent retreat here. I'm curious just for people that are curious. Some people can't travel to Bhutan to hang out face to face, but given scalable technologies, which are maybe your favorite wearable technology, and which one would be the sort of favorite app that you think has helped you the most on your continued journey of transformation?
Yeah, the things that I tell people who are just really getting started is, for so my personal. So often people ask me what my personal meditation app is. I use Insight Timer, and and I just love it. I just really need a timer, and all my data is there for years of meditating. Um, and I go pretty hardcore on the retreats. Like I've done 33 days in the jungle of Burma, and so I'm like really hardcore. So I actually just need a timer, but there's a lot of other. And Insight Timer is starting to have more. It has some pretty good onboarding programs. Of course, there's Headspace and there's Calm. Those are all outstanding. I just use a timer. A couple of things that I do that I really love. I have an app called Memory Jogger, and it's setting your own notifications. And you can put in whatever you want. So every month or so, I will sort of like really rewrite, or I'll write what are the what are the either the mantras or the reminders that I need the most. So sometimes it's drink water, you know and then sometimes it's things like, how am I attending to my deepest emotional needs in this moment? And so you can put anything in there. So you can write a sentence that really speaks to what is the most alive for you. And then instead of, it's like I have all my other notifications turned off. I don't get text notifications, I don't get email notifications. The only notifications I get are the ones where I am speaking to me about the life I want to create. So that's a big favorite of mine. I
Yeah.
love it. Another product that I love, just because it just works so well, is they're basically haptic products. So one is Apollo Neuro, another one is Touch Points. And basically what it does is it's sort of like a very low level vibration. It's low enough to not distract you so much that you can't think or do what you're doing, but it's high enough that it captures the attention of your inner lizard. Like the part of your brain that often freaks out, and then when your body gets attached to what's happening. So like touch points are great. As soon as you put them on your skin, one on either pocket, they are bilateral. Validated reduction in stress or physiological stress response. 60 to 70%, almost instantly. And it's really just because it's like the lizard that's like, gets distracted, and it's consistent enough that, it's consistent enough that it's not an emergency. It's loud enough that it captures the lizard's attention, and it's low enough that you get to give the speech or work on the model or do the interview or whatever it is you need to do. And it just works. It's great. They're like $149. It's awesome. So that's also, one of my favorites. Another one that I love is Ember, and it's for primetime women. And basically, it's one of the areas I'm fascinated with is thermal regulation. And so, what they're doing right now is, it's great for women who are who or anyone really who has issues with temperature change. But if you just like go and and research studies on temperature, temperature and performance are, and cognition are really tied. There's a lot of interesting research on it. And the people who built it actually did it because they were really cold inside their lab at MIT. And they were trying to create personal heat sources.
Yeah, before cold was trending, courtesy of Wim Hof.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so there's lots of things like that. There's so many wonderful products out there. So many wonderful products.
So I'm about to turn 40 in like a couple of weeks. Yeah, thank you. I'm equally shocked and sort of happy at the same time. The grey hairs are setting on, as you can tell. But I'm curious. I was wondering this the other day. So I'm turning 40. Biohacking and then transformative technologies. Are getting exponentially more sophisticated and profound in their impacts. So I'm curious, am I middle-aged, or am I less than middle-aged? What's your projection here?
Well, I'm planning on having a 150-year health span. So to me, you're a puppy on the cusp of life, as am I.
I like that.
We're definitely not aging the way our parents did. Right? Like our parents aged completely different than we do. And so I think when you see, the people who are in their 50s, reaching their 60s and 70s, they're going to look different even than the 60s and 70-year-olds today. And so, some of the things that, you'll really be able to see is you'll be able, as you get into your 60s, like you're going to be seeing these really integrated platforms. One of the things I'm really looking forward to is I'm really looking forward to, the wide scale, easy ability to do continuous glucose monitoring. I think that is just going to be a level set, or completely reset things for so many people. I think that there'll be enough data to really do a strong tie between food and mood. And so people will be able to solve a lot of problems in the grocery store, and they'll be empowered to do so. I think that's going to be fascinating. You'll be able to get down to a level of personalization, not just about your physiology, but also your psychology with that. I know a researcher who is working on the ability to measure cortisol and adrenaline in meat. And the reason why that matters, and if you just sort of think about it, is that apparently, if you eat cortisol, then your adrenaline spikes. And if you eat adrenaline, then your cortisol spikes. And think about our food system. The factory farms, I don't know what the farms are like in Australia, but in the US, it's like, these animals know that they're going to die for days. And so their meat is riddled with stress hormones, and then we eat it, and, it's not, the science is not tight yet, but, the theories are that basically like eating death and, eating stress and violence has an effect on your own endocrine system as it relates to how you respond to stress and violence. So it turns out the Buddhists were right.
We're leaving with some advocacy here for vegetarianism and veganism potentially as different ways for both sustainability. Yeah.
Labeling, because what that would do is like you would, when you were looking at if you were looking at the label when you were in the store and you could actually see, adrenaline and cortisol listed, in this, that's far off, but like this meat has this much adrenaline and cortisol, you probably would start picking family farms.
Yeah, exactly. Farm to table or reading the book, The Ethical Omnivore, for example, I think is playing a little bit with Michael Pollan's original Omnivore's Dilemma concept. Yeah, I think fascinating. I think there's a real story here in terms of, both the numbers, the data, the transparency of what we eat, and then the constant monitoring and mapping. Hopefully, also the hacking and the interventions that you've spoken about here during the second Renaissance, and how we all, on an individual and global humanitarian level, all flourish as individuals and as a society. So thank you very much for sharing your future vision with us here, Nichol Bradford.
My pleasure. Thank you for your time. It was fun.